Have you ever woken in the middle of the night and wondered if life has quietly passed you by while you were busy trying to hold it together? Not in the dramatic ways, but in the soft, cruel forgetting of who you once were. There is a silence we carry in old age. A silence that isn't empty, but full of unanswered questions, half-finished prayers, and memories too sacred to speak aloud. Most people fear the end. But what if I told you? The greatest secret isn't found in avoiding death, but in finally understanding what it means to truly live. Buddhist wisdom whispers this truth, but only the ones who've lost enough, loved enough, and sat long enough in stillness can hear it. And tonight, perhaps for the first time, I will share it with you. Not as a teacher, not even as a monk, but as an old man with nothing left to prove, and one last truth left to tell. There is a quiet that only the old can hear. It isn't silence in the usual sense, not the absence of sound, but a stillness that wraps around your bones like a gentle fog, soft and familiar. Keep learning new skills, the river never stops flowing. I once thought that learning was something reserved for the young. Back when my knees didn't creak and my hands didn't tremble, I could pick up a hammer or a book and make sense of it before lunch. But now, when it takes me a good 5 minutes just to find my glasses, it would be easy to believe that learning no longer belongs to me. But that's where we're wrong, isn't it? The Buddha once said, "Whatever has the nature to arise will also pass away." That includes youth. That includes clarity. And yes, even that includes the fear that says I can't learn anymore. Let me tell you a story. At 76, I decided to learn how to paint. Now, I wasn't trying to be the next Monet, mind you. I just wanted to understand color. Not with my eyes but with my heart. The first few weeks were laughable. My hands didn't obey. The brushes fell, the colors mudded. But something strange happened. For the first time in decades, I felt alive again. Every stroke became a meditation. Every mistake was a lesson in humility. And in the quiet moments between paints and sighs, I remembered that the point wasn't to be good. It was to be present. Learning, at its heart, is not about mastering. It's about being open. Open to the moment. Open to our own awkwardness. Open to the fact that we're still becoming, even at 85. I now use a smartphone. Took me 2 months to figure out how to send a text without accidentally calling the police. But I did it. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted to show myself I still could. Buddhism teaches us that the mind is like a candle. If left in the dark too long, it flickers out. But if tended to, if lit with curiosity and wonder, it continues to glow. And so, I keep learning. A new recipe. A few words in Spanish. The names of birds at my window. Because each time I do, I send myself a message. You're not done yet. You're still flowing. Lesson from the river. You are not a stone. You are not a tree whose growing has stopped. You are the river, soft, bending, always moving. And as long as you are breathing, you are becoming. So don't ask, isn't it too late? Ask instead, what else is waiting for me? Prioritize your health, the middle way in flesh and bone. I wake up before the sun most days. Not because I have to, there's nowhere urgent to be at my age. But because the stillness before dawn is when I can hear my body best. It whispers, not shouts. Sometimes it says, just stretch today. Other times it says, let's take the long walk around the lake. There was a time when I ignored that voice. I ate what pleased the tongue, not what nourished the body. I worked long hours and called it strength. But now, I understand something the Buddha called the middle way, a life not of indulgence, nor of denial, but of harmony. When I was younger, I believed health was about how much you could lift, how far you could run. But now, Health is about how gently I rise in the morning, how deeply I breathe, how kindly I feed the body that has carried me across continents of sorrow and joy. I met a woman once, 83, in a small town not far from here. People said she glowed. Her eyes had clarity. Her steps were slow but sure. When I asked her the secret, she said, "I treat my body the way I would treat a wise old friend, gently, with reverence. I don't demand youth from it anymore. I thank it, every day, for staying with me." That stayed with me. You see, aging is not about falling apart. It's about realigning. Like a violin that needs tuning, our bodies ask us to slow down, listen closer, care deeper. I started drinking warm water with lemon each morning. I gave up sugar not out of fear, but out of respect. I do yoga not to impress, but to remain connected to my breath. This is not punishment. This is compassion in action. The Buddha once sat beneath the Bodhi tree for 49 days. He didn't rush. He didn't chase. He sat and listened. That's health to me now. Sitting. Listening. Responding, not reacting. Lesson from the body. Your body is not your enemy. It is not failing you, it is inviting you into a new relationship. Not one of demand, but one of devotion. So feed it slowly. Move it mindfully. Rest it like you would a temple between prayers. And always thank it for getting you this far. Build a strong social circle, the Sangha of the heart. I used to believe solitude was strength. When my wife passed away 15 years ago, I closed every curtain in the house. I said it was for privacy. But really, I was building walls. Thick, silent ones. For a while, I thought I was doing just fine. I had my books. My tea. The old rocking chair by the fireplace. But silence, if you let it grow too thick, begins to feel like grief wearing slippers. Then came Martha. She was 79. A neighbor who moved in down the road. She knocked on my door one afternoon with a pie in hand and a sentence I hadn't heard in years. "You look like someone who could use some company." That afternoon turned into weekly walks. Weekly walks became dinners. Dinners turned into a little group we now call the Lantern Circle. 5 of us gray-haired, weathered, and wonderfully alive. We share soup and poetry. We argue about politics and laugh over old music. And in those moments, I remembered something the Buddha taught. The Sangha is not a luxury, it's a necessity. We are not meant to travel this path alone. Even the enlightened one walked with others. He smiled with them, sat beside them, listened to their pain. There's a story I love. In a quiet village, hidden among cedar trees, there was a group of elders who met every sunrise. They brought no agenda, just presence. One day a boy passing through asked, "Why do you gather every morning?" The eldest among them replied, "To remember we are still alive." That's it, really. Connection reminds us of our aliveness. As we age, our circles shrink. Friends move on. Some pass. Some forget. But it doesn't mean we stop building. No, it means we build deeper, not wider. Buddhism teaches that everything arises in dependence. There is no self without other. No joy without sharing. No wisdom that does not echo. Lesson from the heart. Surround yourself with those who make you laugh when your body aches. Who listen when your words falter. Who see the stories behind your wrinkles and still ask to hear more. Aging alone may be quiet, but aging together is music. And even in winter, songs warm the soul. Embrace change, Anixa, the eternal dance. If there's one thing age teaches without mercy, it's this. Nothing stays. Not the house you built with your bare hands. Not the steady rhythm of your spouse's breathing beside you each night. Not even the way your name sounds on the lips of old friends. Everything changes. I still remember the sound of my old pickup truck. It sputtered, but faithfully carried me and my daughters to school, to grocery stores, to Sunday picnics. 37 years that truck stayed with me. And one day, it just wouldn't start anymore. I cried. Not because it was just metal and wheels, but because it was the last thread to a life that had already faded into photographs. But as I stood in the driveway, hands on the rusting hood, something quiet settled inside me. This, too, is the Dharma. The law of anicca impermanence. In Buddhism, change is not the enemy. Change is the teacher. The seasons bow to each other. Autumn makes way for winter. Winter bends towards spring. Our lives must do the same. There was once an old monk who lived at the edge of a wild forest. Each morning, he would walk barefoot through the trees, observing how they changed with the wind, the weather, the years. One day, a young monk asked, "Master, doesn't it bother you that nothing here stays the same?" The elder smiled gently. "Why should it? The river sings differently every day and still it sings. I've learned to let go more easily now. The home I once owned was sold to a young family with laughter in their bones. My favorite jacket too tight around the belly was gifted to a neighbor. My old garden once so meticulously tended is now wild with daisies I never planted. And somehow, it is all still beautiful. You see, the key to peace in old age is not in holding on tighter, but in softening your grip. Let go of what no longer serves you. The resentment, the regrets, the illusion that life owes you permanence. Because when you open your hand, you make room for what wants to arrive. Lesson from the wind. Do not mourn the falling leaf. It nourishes the earth. Do not fear the new path. It was made just for your feet. Change is not the thief of joy. It is the doorway to grace. And when you walk through it with mindfulness, you'll find that every ending is simply another way of saying, begin again. Have a rich sense of humor, laughter as a spiritual practice. You wouldn't think it by looking at me now, bent back, slow shuffle, more skin than hair, but I used to have quite the laugh. The kind that shook the room. The kind that embarrassed my daughters in public. And I'll tell you something. I still do. It's just quieter now. Like everything else, it's aged with me slower, gentler, but still there. There was a time I thought growing old meant becoming serious. No more silliness. No more making faces at grandchildren during family dinners. No more whispering jokes to strangers in grocery store lines. But the older I got, the more I realized something funny literally. The people who age well. They laugh. They laugh at their stiff joints. At their old photos. At the absurdity of growing hair in places where hair has no business growing. The Buddha, too, laughed. There's a story, maybe apocryphal, maybe not, of a time when the disciples sat before him, stiff and somber, expecting great wisdom. Instead, the Buddha told a story so absurd, they all burst into uncontrollable laughter. And then he smiled and said, "Now, your minds are open. Now, you're ready to receive truth." Laughter softens the mind like warm tea softens dry lips. It humbles us. It reminds us that even in suffering, there is lightness. And more importantly, it connects us. I remember this one time I joined a senior yoga class by accident. I thought it was a lecture on yogurt and digestion. I really need to clean my glasses more often. 10 minutes in, there I was, trying to balance on one foot while an 80-year-old named Margaret whispered, "Just pretend you're a flamingo, dear." I fell. We laughed. And I made a new friend that day. Humor is not just a mood. It's a medicine. It lowers blood pressure. It boosts the immune system. But most importantly, it tells the universe, I'm still here. Still dancing. Still smiling through the rain. Lesson from laughter. Don't let the years weigh too heavily on your brow. Let them carve smile lines instead. Laugh not because life is always funny, but because your heart refuses to grow bitter. And when you share that laugh with another soul, you're not just relieving stress, you're opening the door to compassion. Because a smile is the shortest distance between two souls. Prioritize self-care. Compassion begins with you. There's a story I never told anyone, not even my daughters. When I was in my 60s, not long after my wife passed, I fell into a rhythm of giving. I cooked for the neighbors. I fixed broken steps at the church. I watched over a friend with Parkinson's. I told myself it was noble. I wore my exhaustion like a badge of honor. But late one night, as I stood alone at the kitchen sink, washing dishes for people who never asked me to, my hands began to shake. Not from age. From emptiness. I had forgotten to feed myself. Not just food, but peace. Time. Kindness. Buddhism teaches us about metta, loving kindness. But the part most of us forget is that metta begins within. You cannot pour from a cup that's cracked. And so, I had to learn slowly, gently, that self-care is not selfish. It is sacred. I began waking up a little earlier. Not for chores, but for myself. A warm cup of tea. A slow walk with no destination. Soft music, sometimes no music at all. And when I looked into the mirror, I no longer sighed at the wrinkles. I said, "Thank you." Because these lines are proof I lived. There's a tale I once heard from a monastery in the north. A young monk, worried about aging, asked his teacher, "Master, how should I care for myself as my body weakens?" The old teacher smiled and said, "Tend to your body as you would tend to the Bodhi tree. With patience, protection, and prayer. It will not bloom forever. But while it does, let it blossom fully." I began doing little things. Clipping my nails with intention. Cooking meals that nourished rather than numbed. Rubbing my knees with oil before bed, not because I expected them to stop hurting, but because they had earned it. Self-care, you see, is an act of love. Not just for the body but for the soul it carries. When I light a candle and sit in silence, I'm not wasting time. I'm returning home. And when I say no to an invitation because I'm tired, I'm not being rude. I'm being honest. Gentle. Present with my own needs. Lesson from the flame. The lamp cannot light others if it has no oil. Tend to yourself the way you would a sacred fire. With reverence, with consistency, with care. Let your self-care be your prayer. Let your stillness be your offering. Let your joy be your legacy. Be a light for younger generations, the quiet legacy. I didn't think I had much to offer anymore. My hands tremble. My memory skips like an old record. I forget names sometimes of people, places, even tools I once used daily. But then one afternoon, my grandson, only 16, sat across from me and asked, "Grandpa, how do you stay so calm when things go wrong?" I nearly laughed. Me? Calm? But then I realized he wasn't asking for techniques. He was asking for something far deeper. Something no book, no app, no podcast could give him. He was asking for witnessed wisdom. The Buddha once said, "A wise man does not speak just to be heard. He speaks when the moment calls for silence turned into guidance." And that's what we are now, in these later years. We are not teachers in the loud sense. We are the still water they come to kneel beside. We are the long shadows that remind them where the light is. I've stopped trying to be relevant. I stopped learning slang. Stopped giving advice where it wasn't welcome. Instead, I listen. I let them see how I move through grief. How I make my tea with care. How I sit with disappointment and don't run from it. How I forgive, even when the other person never says sorry. That's the real teaching, isn't it? The young don't need our perfection. They need our presence. They need to see that it's okay to age. That it's okay to fail and laugh anyway. That it's okay to feel lost and still keep walking. I once met a teenage boy at the local library. He looked anxious, lost in his headphones and hoodie. I said nothing but smiled as I held the door open. Weeks later, he returned and quietly left a note on my table. "Thank you for making me feel seen when I thought I was invisible." One smile. No words. And yet, the light passed on. Lesson from the candle. You don't have to preach to teach. You don't need an audience to pass on truth. Live kindly. Live slowly. Live honestly. And those who watch you, your children, your neighbors, the quiet ones at the edge of the room, will carry your fire long after your flame has gone out. This is legacy. Not wealth. Not success. But the gentle way your life touched another. Find joy in simple things, the sacred practice of mindfulness. It took me 80 years to finally learn how to drink a cup of tea. Not sip it while checking the news. Not gulp it down between errands. But to really, truly, drink it. To feel the warmth in my hands. To breathe in the steam. To taste the bitterness and thank it. You see, there's a myth about joy. That it lives in big things. Weddings. Promotions. Trips across oceans. But at 85, I can tell you. Joy lives in the small, the quiet, the ordinary. It lives in the way sunlight hits the table in late afternoon. In the soft crackle of firewood. In the feel of worn socks and the sound of distant birds. The Buddha taught. When walking, just walk. When eating, just eat. Not because we're incapable of multitasking. But because presence is the only place where peace lives. I remember watching my wife fold laundry. She'd hum the same tune every time. One day I asked, "Doesn't this bore you?" She smiled. "No. Each fold is a prayer. Each shirt is a story. I'm not folding clothes, I'm caring for the people I love." I didn't understand it then. But I do now. When I water my plants, I whisper to them. When I wash dishes, I watch the water flow. When I sit at the window, I don't check the time. I listen. To life. To breath. To being. Mindfulness is not about perfection. It's about participation. You don't need incense. You don't need robes. You just need willingness. To be fully here. And when you are, even the smallest things become sacred. A spoon of honey. A breeze on your cheek. The way your name sounds when spoken by someone who still remembers. Lesson from the steam. The present moment is not a stepping stone to the next. It is the altar. It is the offering. It is the blessing. So walk slowly. Chew softly. Sit without needing to rise. And you will find that joy was never missing. Only your attention was. Live with purpose, the final offering of aging. There's a hush that comes with old age. Not silence, no, that came earlier. This hush is deeper. It's a kind of stillness that settles into your bones, where the rushing of life used to be. It's the moment when you stop asking, "What should I do next?" and begin asking, "What have I become? What can I give before I go?" When I turned 80, a young nurse asked me, "Do you still have goals, Mr. Whitman?" I smiled. "I do," I said. "But they've changed shape. I no longer wanted to build something grand. I wanted to become something small but whole. A shelter for the stories. A lantern for those still walking." In Buddhism, purpose is not a destination. It's not some glorious mountain you conquer. It is the way you walk the path. It's the intention you carry with each breath, each act, each word. Right intention. Right action. Right livelihood. The Eightfold Path is not just a guide to nirvana. It is a guide to a meaningful life. I've found my purpose in tiny things now. Writing letters by hand to people I love. Praying for strangers I'll never meet. Teaching my great-grandchildren how to be still for 3 minutes before bedtime. 3 minutes is a miracle in the age of glowing screens. There was once an elder in a mountain temple. She never left her village. Never wrote a book. Never gave a sermon. But each day she swept the temple floors with care. Boiled tea with love. And when people sat beside her, they felt lighter. Not because she gave advice, but because her presence whispered something that words never could. This moment is enough. You see, as our bodies bend and our pace slows, our purpose doesn't fade. It deepens. We become storytellers. We become vessels of memory, of patience, of perspective. We become the quiet fire at the heart of the home. Lesson from the embers. You are still becoming. Not something more. Something truer. Purpose is not in doing more. It is in being more of who you already are. And that your tenderness, your wisdom, your stillness is the gift you offer the world. If something in this story softened your breath, if it reminded you of a moment you've almost forgotten, or a version of yourself you've been quietly missing, then let this not be goodbye. Let it be a beginning. Whisper of Age is more than a channel. It's a bench by the river. A place where weary hearts rest and find themselves again. So if your soul feels at home here, subscribe. Stay a while. Come back when the world feels too loud. Because the world may rush. But here, we remember how to sit still. And one last truth before you go. You are not too late. You are not too old. You are exactly where life needs your light to be. Even now. Especially now. Your breath is sacred. Your presence is a gift. And your story is not over. So keep walking. Not to chase, but to arrive. May you live gently and be deeply loved by life itself.